The opening scene of episode 2 gives us the impression that Kragus Drahar and the Triarchy are actively feasting on the Stepstones. In King's Landing, the small council is discussing the death of Sir Ryam Wedwin, who was the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Ryam didn't have a featured role in episode 1, but he was part of the Kingsguard for over 50 years, serving not only Viserys, but his grandfather, King Jaehaerys as well. The council discusses the preparations to have another knight sworn into the Kingsguard, before Corlys storms into the room with news from the Stepstones. The potential disaster brewing in the Stepstones that he warned the council about 6 months ago has escalated. And just like before, he seemed to be the only member of the council willing to take immediate action on the matter. Otto is comfortable with putting a band-aid on the wound in the form of compensation, and Viserys is hesitant to free the area by force. Otto may be playing a game of attrition here with the Velaryons. He knows that their house thrives on trade within the Narrow Sea, and that the Triarchy can potentially weaken their market share. He might be willing to let them bleed as long as possible, an approach that comes with its fair share of risk. If the Triarchy is left unchecked, they could become a problem for every port city in Westeros. Viserys had already decided to take a more diplomatic approach on the matter, wanting for allies in Essos before taking action. In theory, avoiding war and seeking out mutual friends may seem like a strategic move, but his lack of action has made them look weak. The Crabfeeder is actively seizing Westerosi ships and leaving their sailors out to die, which in any case is already an act of war, and Corlys wasn't afraid to call Viserys out on that. While the father was thinking diplomacy, the daughter was thinking weapons of mass destruction, and before Rhaenyra could justify her plan, Otto suggested that she could be of use elsewhere. His interruption was condescending in a way. He silenced Rhaenyra in a room full of powerful men. Regardless of whether or not her idea was realistic, she was robbed of the opportunity to contribute to the discussion. This would come full circle later on when Rhaenyra has a conversation with the Princess Rhaenys and is reminded about the order of things in Westeros. With her strategy rejected, it was decided that Rhaenyra would help choose the next brother of the Kingsguard. She then held an audience with a list full of knights that included Sir Ryan Mallister, Sir Criston Cole, and Sir Desmond Caron. Little did she know that this was a trial that went beyond that of picking the best knight. There were more things to consider than combat skill, but Rhaenyra approached the matter in a stubborn way. Even if Sir Criston Cole was the best choice, she failed to give the other knights proper consideration and a proper rejection. As Otto suggested, some of these knights come from proud houses that are allied to the crown. Her lack of formality is something that these houses will remember. In her defense, she was right in saying that a knight of the Kingsguard should have combat experience, but as the heir to the Iron Throne, she failed to consider the significance of politics and court formalities. Otto's investment was beginning to bear fruit. We see that the king has opened up to Alicent over the past 6 months, letting her into his comfort zone by expressing his feelings toward personal matters and sharing his knowledge of old Valyria. Viserys revealing too much might have its own set of consequences in the future. On the other hand, we see that these feelings of comfort may not be mutual, at least not yet. After all, it's implied in the last episode and later on in this one that Alicent is being forced to get close to Viserys by her father. Alicent is mostly a listener in this relationship. She probes Viserys for his knowledge of history, compliments him on his progress of his hobby, and gives him advice regarding Rhaenyra. Alicent never reveals too much of her thoughts and feelings verbally, even though you can see it in her face. She's noticeably uncomfortable, particularly when Rhaenyra is brought up, because she knows that she's actively betraying her trust. Following the interaction between Viserys and Alicent, we're led directly into an interaction with Alicent and Rhaenyra, giving us Alicent's perspective of playing both sides in this triangle. Rhaenyra is plainly unaware of what's going on between Alicent and Viserys. Ironically enough, their conversation begins with dialogue concerning her father and the plans to have him remarry. And it just so happens that Alicent is a part of one of these plans. In a dynamic teetering on fear versus love, I wonder if Alicent feared her father more than she loved Rhaenyra, or perhaps she never truly valued their friendship and was simply close to her as a matter of circumstance. Regardless of how she felt, this was the perfect moment for Alicent to reveal that her father planned to marry her to Viserys, if she cared about Rhaenyra's feelings. Their conversation transitions into a prayer ceremony where they both share in the sorrow of losing their mothers before Rhaenyra breaks down due to the relationship between her and her father. Alicent is there to comfort her, in what may have been their very last moment of genuine intimacy. The next interaction sets the tone for the rest of the episode, which will conclude with Viserys' decision to take a new wife. Corlys and Rhaenys respectfully tell the king that he's let the realm look vulnerable by allowing Daemon to claim the seat of Dragonstone, allowing the Triarchy to establish a colony in the Stepstones, and naming a female as the heir to the Iron Throne. Their solution was an offer of marriage to unite their houses and secure the possibility of strengthening his line. They essentially told him face to face that he's been doing a terrible job of maintaining the stability of the realm and that his enemies have their eyes set on the Iron Throne, which is ironic because they too have their eyes set on the Iron Throne. A marriage to Laena would strengthen the possibility of a Velaryon one day ruling the realm. In the canon of Fire and Blood, the Velaryons have already had a queen sit the Iron Throne, and Aegon the Conqueror was half Velaryon himself on the side of his mother. But it seems like the show may have gone in a different direction. While the Princess Rhaenys wed Corlys, it doesn't seem like the Velaryons have had a queen yet. In any case, House Velaryon is actively trying to reach for the highest seat in the realm. Anyhow, right within the small council, there's another who has the same goal, the Hand of the King, and possibly his brother as well, who planted their seed before Corlys and Rhaenys could. And while Corlys and Rhaenys took a direct approach, Otto went in a different direction. The awkward tension between Viserys and Rhaenyra is explored in the next scene. The two haven't spoken much after the death of Aemma, and you could hear the guilt behind Viserys' voice when he reassured Rhaenyra that he loved her. The conversation continued with the topic of the new Kingsguard, before Rhaenyra apologizes for speaking out at the meeting of the small council. Viserys assures her that she will learn, but the real question is, from whom? One thing is to be taught the formality of court, and another thing is to learn the Game of Thrones. Surely she will be taught the former, as Otto attempted to do earlier, but who will teach her how to play the game within the game? Viserys isn't very good at the game, as pointed out by Corlys and Rhaenys. He was in no position to speak from a position of perfection. If anything, Viserys could have expressed his feelings towards his own recent failures, as an example that they both have a lot to learn. And perhaps Grand Maester Mellos has a lot to learn about medicine as well. Or maybe he knows exactly what he's doing. In any case, the wound that Viserys suffered 6 months ago has festered, making this the second wound that we know of that Mellos has failed to heal properly. He gives the king a treatment of maggots to rid his finger from any decaying flesh, before the king brings up Corlys and his marriage proposal. Otto does a good job of hiding his true feelings on the matter by reasoning that Laena is too young to marry, although he looked visibly concerned that Corlys might have beat him to the punch. Mellos counsels in favor of marrying Laena, supporting his advice by mentioning the stability that would come from marrying the Velaryons into the royal family. While Otto and Mellos counseled separate courses of action, they do exchange a few suspicious looks with each other, possibly hinting that they're on the same page. Viserys' main concern here is not necessarily who he's going to marry, but how Rhaenyra will feel about it. Mellos essentially tells Viserys that her opinion doesn't matter, but in a logical sense. Technically, if anything happens to her by accident or by design, the line of succession would fall into Daemon's favor once again, and it would be a lot harder to deny him the throne when there's no one else to contest his claim. And that would be the very thing Mellos and Otto are trying to avoid here. In the next scene, we see Viserys walking with Laena, in what was perhaps an arrangement set up by Corlys. Laena is a young girl with a huge interest in dragons. She asked Viserys about the Black Dread, and she also knew about Vhagar prior to their conversation, hinting that her curiosity has already been explored, but she's still eager to learn more. The conversation comes to a stop when Laena addresses the elephant in the room and expresses her father's wish, telling Viserys that she would be honored to join their houses. Their entire interaction is awkward for obvious reasons. While underage marriage is accepted in their society, Viserys feels like Laena is too young for him to marry, and Laena expresses through her body language that she's doing as she's told. As their conversation cuts away, we see Rhaenyra spectating from above, before she runs into the Princess Rhaenys. Rhaenys has been watching her from afar, and was ready to share some wisdom with her. something that her father should have told her as a warning and as a word of advice when she became the heir, and that was that men would rather put the realm to the torch than to see a woman ascend the Iron Throne. At first, Rhaenyra seemed to think that Rhaenys' advice was out of spite because she was the queen who never was. But as the conversation went on, Rhaenys' words cut deep. Rhaenyra already knew that powerful men in the realm have intended to have her father marry, and she literally just saw it in real time with Laena. But as Rhaenys said, no one has had the courage or the intention to tell her the truth of the matter, which is why this interaction held weight. Rhaenyra was ignorant to think that her position was set in stone, but she could no longer say that no one warned her, or that she didn't know any better. Viserys lunches with Alicent, and they talk about the potential of having him remarry. They discuss the Lady Laena, which triggers Alicent's habit of peeling the skin around her fingernails. I think the news of Laena possibly triggered some anxiety within Alicent. She might be afraid of what her father might do to her if her efforts to seduce the king have failed. Their interaction shifts when Alicent gives Viserys a repaired dragon model, following up on the one that broke earlier in the episode. This gesture may have driven the message home for a prophetic man like Viserys, who may have interpreted this as a sign that he should consider marrying Alicent, as a way to help strengthen the line of House Targaryen. They're interrupted by Otto, who has called an emergency meeting of the small council. Daemon has stolen a dragon's egg, proclaimed himself the Prince of Dragonstone, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, and has announced that he is to take a second wife. Daemon is essentially in open rebellion with the message that he left for the council. He defied Viserys' order of sending him back to the Vale. He's publicly rejecting his wife by law, denying the king's named heir, and claiming the ancient seed of Dragonstone that belongs to the Princess Rhaenyra. Daemon wants to bring a reaction out of Viserys, but Otto made sure to stand in his way. By denying the two brothers a reunion, Otto was actively preventing any chance of a possible reconciliation. Viserys is a people pleaser at heart, and Daemon would have an opportunity to win back his brother's favor. Otto offers to go himself, and as the leading member of the party, he could control the direction that this confrontation would go in. Despite knowing better, Otto still failed to predict what Daemon was capable of. He likely would have died if a certain princess didn't come in to save the day. As he prepares to set sail for Dragonstone, Otto notices Alicent's destructive habit and shows a hint of their abusive dynamic. Earlier in the episode, Alicent told Rhaenyra that her father doesn't understand the language of women, and it's clear that he doesn't understand, or care to understand, the pressure that he's putting his daughter through. Alicent is a teenage girl expected to seduce a middle-aged man who just so happens to be her friend's father. This is a heavy burden, not to mention the expectations and the changes that would come if she married the king. At Dragonstone, Otto and his forces confront Daemon and his army. Daemon doesn't respect Otto, and the fact that he came in place of Viserys ruined his entire plan. And he would have gotten his wish if it weren't for Otto, who claimed that Viserys would never entertain his games. As their interaction continues, we get a subtle hint that Mysaria was unaware of Daemon's public announcement regarding their marriage and child, one that becomes more obvious when Rhaenyra shows up and calls Daemon's bluff. Otto calls out the men of the City Watch, who are truly aiding Daemon in his treason. I think this speaks volumes as to how loyal they are to Daemon. Daemon was stripped of his right to inherit the throne, and he lost his seat at court. Yet not only do they still choose to follow him, they are actively aiding him in his rebellion. Tensions flare until swords are drawn, and the men around Otto, such as Sir Harold Westerling and Sir Criston Cole, begin to realize the lengths that Daemon was willing to go for his cause. Otto realizes that while Daemon would eventually lose this war, he wouldn't survive this battle, especially since Daemon has Caraxes, and they didn't bring a dragon of their own. Considering that Daemon didn't send the call for Caraxes, I wonder if dragons can sense when their rider is in danger. The Bloodworm makes his appearance immediately after swords are drawn, and this is when Otto reconsiders the situation. Before any blood could be shed, Rhaenyra makes an appearance on Syrax. Rhaenyra confronts her uncle for his recent actions. By housing the seed of Dragonstone and declaring himself the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, he is undermining Rhaenyra's position. and instead of falling into his game, she calls his bluff and dares him to kill her. It seems like Daemon considered it for at least a moment, but at the end of the day, Daemon loves Rhaenyra, and he didn't set this whole scenario up to kill her. He did it to get Viserys' attention. Rhaenyra leaves Dragonstone having completed her mission, before we cut to a scene between Daemon and Mysaria. Mysaria is upset that Daemon is using her for one of his political games, and by doing so, he's putting her in danger. And while Daemon can afford to play his games, a common-born woman like Mysaria cannot. It seems like she's had a troubled past as a slave, often living in fear. And while she's been free of fear with Daemon, she has no desire to live in fear once again. Back at the Red Keep, Viserys seeks the counsel of Lord Lionel Strong. Lionel, at least so far, seems to be one of the men in the small council with no obvious agenda to gain power for himself. He provides an unbiased take on the matter of suitors, and advises that the king marry Laena Velaryon. He provides solid reasoning for the match, and he warns Viserys that Corlys is unlikely to handle a rejection well, and that he's justified for wanting such a strong match, due to his position of power and influence. Their meeting is cut short with Rhaenyra's arrival back from Dragonstone. Viserys and Rhaenyra have a conversation about a couple of things, including her decision to retrieve the egg from Daemon. Eventually they transition into their grief for Aemma, and then the matter of marriage. Viserys has finally had some sort of closure regarding Aemma's death, and is ready to talk to Rhaenyra about what comes next. Rhaenyra has accepted that her father has to remarry, but she was not ready for who he was about to marry. In the next meeting of the small council, Viserys announces that he's marrying Alicent Hightower. His decision draws mixed responses throughout the room. Corlys feels disrespected, Rhaenyra feels betrayed, and Otto is happy. The episode opened with a questionable verdict of the small council regarding the Triarchy, and it closes with a controversial decision from Viserys. In his defense, no matter who Viserys chose to marry, he was going to upset someone. If he chose to marry Laena, Otto would be outraged. If he chose to marry Alicent, Corlys would be outraged. If he chose to marry another lady from a different house, perhaps both Corlys and Otto would have been outraged. However, I wonder if Viserys considered Rhaenyra's feelings when choosing Alicent. Part of the reason Viserys delayed his second marriage was because he was considerate of Rhaenyra's feelings, and marrying Alicent feels counterintuitive to that. A quick consideration of the matter would have ended with the conclusion that marrying Alicent would not only ruin the relationship between Viserys and Rhaenyra, but also put her in an uncomfortable position. Maybe he did consider her feelings, and chose his needs over hers. The episode closes with an interaction between the Lord of the Tides and the Rogue Prince. Corlys gives us a monologue on the history of House Velaryon, an ancient Valyrian house that didn't have any dragons, and had to find a different path to success, one that they carved out from the sea. Corlys is a proud man. His 9 voyages are part of the reason that his house is the wealthiest in the realm. Corlys and Daemon share in the fact that they were both recently passed over. Daemon lost his right to the throne, and Corlys' marriage proposal was rejected. Corlys proposed a course of action with mutual interest. Ridding the stepstones of the crab feeder would free the shipping lanes that were critical for House Velaryon's trade, and defeating the Triarchy was a chance for Daemon to prove his worth to Viserys. The realm was heading into a new era. The king was heading into his second marriage. Alicent was going to give her house more political power, and Corlys would soon dive into a war with the Triarchy, with Daemon by his side. That's it for me. Please like and comment if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe for more content like this. Peace.